Hi folks. This is a kids' church message for upper elementary kids for the month of September. Our story of the month is the creation story. And all of you guys are old enough that you probably remember that we talked about the creation story last September as well. We're repeating it for a few reasons. One is that we feel like the creation story is a really important one. It's at the very beginning of the Bible. It helps us understand some of who God is, and it helps us think about the whole world and all the creatures in it, and our place in the midst of those creatures. One of the other reasons that we are repeating the creation story is because all of our stories for this school year are going to focus on one theme. You ready? The theme is all are welcome. You might recognize that from Sunday mornings. Do you recognize that phrase? All are welcome. I wonder how the creation story connects to that idea. Think about that. Hold on to it. We'll come back to that question later. The third reason that we are repeating the creation story is that our Bible has two different creation stories in it. Did you know that? Maybe you had already noticed that. Sometimes the way that we tell these stories kind of blends them together, and so it can be hard to realize that it's really two separate creation stories. The first creation story is the one that comes in the first book of Genesis, right at the very beginning of the Bible. And if you have a Bible at home, you can flip it open and, move past the table of contents and all that opening stuff. But find the first book of the Bible, Genesis, and the very beginning of that book, it says, "In the beginning." And that's the first creation story. The first creation story is the story that has 7 days. Do you remember that? God creates the light and the darkness on day 1 of creation and says it is very good. And then God creates the separation between the sky and the water, and it's good. And then on the 3rd day, God makes the separation between the land and the water, and it's very good. And then all the creatures start to live in those spaces. So the sun lives in the daytime, and the moon and stars live in the night sky. And then the birds live in the air, and the fish live in the sea. And then on the 6th day of creation, all of the creatures of the land start to live on the land. The creepy, crawly ones, and the farm animals like cows, and the wild animals like lions, and then humans. All of that is on the 6th day. And then on the 7th day, God rests. Do you remember that one? Now, the second creation story comes in Genesis 2, the next chapter. And in this second creation story, the focus is really on the creation of human beings. So the order is a little bit different. In the second creation story, we hear that God took the earth and molded that earth into a person, and then breathed God's breath into that clay person and brought them to life. And that person was named Adam because the word for dirt in Hebrew is Adamah. So the earth person is named Adam. And then in that creation story, God looks at this person who is made out of the dirt of the ground and then brought alive with God's breath. And God thinks, this person looks lonely. I need to create other beings to be with this person. And that is when God starts creating the animals in the second story. This person is put into a garden with all kinds of beautiful plants growing. And then God creates all of these animals and brings them to the person named Adam. And Adam begins to give names to all of these different creatures. But God notices that this person still seems lonely. None of these other animals are quite the right kind of friend. God realizes that this person needs someone who is more like them. And so while Adam is asleep, God takes one of the ribs out of his body and uses that to form a second person. And when Adam wakes up, there is another person there that he names Eve. And they are exactly right for each other. They are good friends. They're the right match. So I want you to think about those two stories. There are differences between them, aren't there? And if we were approaching the Bible as if it was a science book, it would be really confusing that these two stories of creation don't match each other very well. In one version, the animals get created before people, and in the other version, people, or at least the first person, gets created before the animals. But the Bible isn't a science book. The Bible is a book that collects together people's experiences of God and their best efforts to understand what God is doing in the world. So the point of stories like the creation story isn't to tell us exactly what happened when the world came into existence. The point of these stories is to help us think about who God is and who we are in the midst of this world where we live. Here are some questions for us to think about. What does it mean that we are, in that first story, created on the same day as all of the other animals of the land? Do we have more things in common with them or more things that are different from other animals on the planet? If you haven't heard of Jane Goodall, she would be a really interesting person to learn about as you think about this question. Before Jane Goodall became a prominent scientist in our world, most scientists taught that humans are very different from all the rest of the animals on the planet. And they had a few reasons for this, one of them being language, but they also thought that humans were the only animals that had feelings. Jane Goodall studied chimpanzees in the wild in a country that we now call Tanzania. And what she noticed while she was studying these chimpanzees is that the way that they connected with each other in community was very similar to human beings. And they expressed a wide range of feelings and emotions. And she has come to believe and to teach all over the world that we humans have much more in common with other animals than we have that's different. I wonder how those two different beliefs impact the decisions that we make about how we live in the world. Here's another question. In the second creation story, God makes the first person out of dirt. I wonder what that means. It doesn't mean that our skin is literally made out of dirt. I mean, we don't wash our hands and then just have everything dissolve, right? But I do think that maybe it helps us recognize that we are made out of the same things that the rest of the planet is made out of. Even things that aren't alive, like rocks and rivers. We're made out of some of the same things that the whole planet is made out of. Some scientists even point out that everything on this planet used to be part of a star that then exploded. And so we could even say that we are made out of stardust. That second story also talks about God breathing life into that person. And did you know that the Hebrew word for breath is the same as the Hebrew word for spirit? Sometimes we think of spirits as like ghosts, something outside of ourselves, or maybe some part of ourself that exists even when our body stops breathing. But how does our understanding of spirit change when we think of it as being the same word as breath? Have you ever thought about taking a deep breath? And wondering, like, is that God's spirit? Just that ability to breathe. All of these stories in the early part of the Bible are stories that have some mystery in them. They're stories that are not really designed to give us answers. They're stories that are designed to get us asking new questions. So I want you this month to think about the questions that you have. When you think about God creating our world or creating your body, what questions do you have about that? Nothing in the Bible is meant to contradict science. We can learn everything that we can from scientists and let that shape the way that we view the world. And we can still find value in these stories that tell about God creating the world and creating us. They're just different ways of helping us understand what's happening in our world. I hope that you have a really good month as you get back into school, doing school on the computers again like we did in the spring, but also different. Seems like things are changing. Sometimes it's confusing and stressful. But I want you to know that I'm thinking of you and I'm praying for you. I am really glad that you exist. And if you have any questions of your own or any thoughts about these creation stories, I would love to know what's happening inside your head, because I find each one of you completely fascinating human beings. So be in touch. Have your parents send me an email, send a note to my house. Let me know what's going on in your head as you start back in school. Take care.